And now, I have the great pleasure of introducing Dr. Cheri the Executive Director of NYU Research Alliance, where she provides leadership for strategic planning and organizational development. Cheri advances the Research Alliance's mission by building effective collaborations with the New York City Department of Education, other local stakeholders, and education researchers across the country. She has managed the development, design, and execution of a variety of important studies, including their evaluation, very important today, of New York City's Computer Science for All initiative. Please join me in welcoming Cheri to the stage.
Thank you so much, Tom. And I'm now going to practice my skill of sharing my screen.
I'll stop sharing. There we go.
Awesome. Let's see how I do. And apologies if the video is not quite catching up.
It looks good.
Great.
And you can see your screen. Perfect.
Great. Well, thank you so much for inviting me here. I'm really excited to share with you some of what we've learned over the last 7 years of our evaluation of the CS4All initiative in New York City. And I wanted to say a little bit about the title of this talk, which comes from an interview that we had with an elementary level computer science teacher. And this is a teacher in a school that's been very successful in implementing computer science. But her point was that the school's success did not result from a single champion teacher or even administrator. The school had a whole team of teachers and administrators working towards a common goal. And in fact, she said, you need a handful of people who can drive this work forward. You can't do it alone. It can't be the administrator just saying, do it. So this quote is really illustrative of many of the themes and findings from our evaluation that I'm going to share with you today. And in particular, it highlights some of the idea that school change of the magnitude that we're talking about with a CS4All initiative, and for that change to be scaled and sustained, it requires alignment along several dimensions, including norms and beliefs about the value of computer science education and the efficacy of the initiative, political support, buy-in for the work at multiple levels, and policies and practices that help build an infrastructure that supports the work from multiple vantage points. So I'm going to talk about just 3 of the themes that have come out of our work. I'm going to talk about context and the ways in which the trends in access and participation and implementation challenges vary by context. I'm going to talk a little bit about constraints, the different types of challenges that schools and teachers have faced and the types of solutions that they suggest. And I'm going to talk about the importance of equity. But first, I'll tell you a little bit about the initiative for those who may not be familiar. And I know there are a lot of New York City friends on this webinar. But New York City began in 2015 with the goal of building teacher capacity to teach computer science and addressing the shortage of CS teachers that I know all districts are facing, so that every student in the district can have at least one CS experience, which could be a unit or integrated into other subjects or a standalone course at each grade band. So over the course of their K-12 career, they would have at least 4 CS experiences. And the initiative is doing this with the understanding that for that to happen and for that work to be sustained, it can't be just at the individual teacher or classroom level, but the initiative also is striving to build school leader capacity and support to sustain CS. And further, the initiative explicitly focuses on equity. So both in terms of broadening participation of girls, Black, and Latinx students, but also in terms of ensuring that educators have the skills and resources and support to offer equitable computer science, knowing that we won't be able to address the long-standing disparities that Tom mentioned earlier in CS without this explicit focus. And so New York City goes about, oops, too many pages. is working towards this through a multi-pronged effort that includes in-depth professional development and learning for teachers, as well as for school leaders, and development and support for teacher leaders and school leaders around developing strong implementation plans. They've developed a lot of curriculum materials and resources, and they offer a multi-level scaffolded professional learning experience around equity practices called Expanding Equity in Computer Science, just to name a few. So first, let me share a few of the trends in access and participation that we've seen in New York City. And this graph is showing participation in two ways. So at the bottom on the orange line, you'll see starting in 2016, the first year of the initiative, it shows the percentage of students at each year in any grade who have gotten computer science. So this is a cross-sectional one-year count of computer science participation. The purple line on top is a metric that we use that aligns with the goals of the initiative. So it's looking at the percentage of students in each grade band that have, at the top of their grade band, have had at least one unit of computer science experience. So it's looking at the second graders at the top of the elementary band, fifth graders at the top of the upper elementary band, eighth graders, and 12th graders. And showing, you'll see in both lines, we see a steady increase in participation, with the exception of 2021, the year that was hardest hit by the pandemic. And by 2022, we see that in terms of grade level participation, nearly 40% of students in New York City at the top of their grade band had at least one experience of computer science. And that may seem modest, but in a system of 1.1 million students, 40% is over 400 students. However, when we look at this by the separate grade bands, we noticed a lot of variation. So fifth graders, almost half of the fifth graders had experienced computer science by the end of the grade band, and 40% of younger elementary students experienced computer science by second grade. But 34% of eighth graders and 31% of 12th graders had experienced computer science. And we know that this variation is predominantly due to the fact that most elementary schools are integrating computer science into core subject areas that all students take. So all students are getting computer science. In contrast, in middle school and high schools, they more frequently offer computer science as a standalone class, particularly in high school, and so students can opt out of those classes. And we know that interest and engagement decreases as students get older, which is contributing to the lower participation of middle and high schoolers. We also see disparities by gender, although they don't reveal themselves until middle and high school, middle school, and the gap widens by the time they get to high school. And then there, of course, are important trends by race and ethnicity as well. So white students shown in the purple bar and Asian students shown in the red bar are more likely to participate than their Black and Latinx peers. And these disparities also increase as students get older. And of course, race and gender are just two of the categories where we know disparities exist. We've also seen in New York City disparities by students with disabilities, multilingual learners, low-income students, and students with lower achievement. And further, we know that there are disparities when you look at the intersectionalities of these identities. So Black boys and girls don't participate at the same rate, and students with different types of IEP classifications participate at different rates as well. And finally, another important trend that we see is a great deal of variation by school. So in this graph, each dot represents a different school in the system. And while we've seen some schools that have been successful at serving 100% of their students, shown by the cluster at the top of the chart, there's an even bigger cluster of schools that are serving 10% or less of their enrollment, shown at the bottom. And we see schools spread out throughout the continuum of that. But this graph also shows the variation by grade bands and school level. So what have we learned about these schools and districts, about why some schools are able to make progress towards full implementation and others lag behind? To answer this question, we looked at the characteristics of schools that were reaching fewer than 10% of their enrollment, and we found that they're more likely to be smaller, which may mean that they have fewer teachers with the capacity to teach CS and less flexibility to offer classes outside of their core curriculum. They're also more likely to be middle schools, where students may start opting out of taking computer science and showing less interest in it. They're also serving more students with lower academic achievement and higher economic need. So they may be struggling to prioritize computer science over other competing demands. And finally, not surprising, these schools are staffed with less experienced teachers and teachers who have lower participation in the Computer Science for All professional development. And all of these point to challenges that can be characterized as structural types of dimensions of change related to school capacity and competing priorities. So we also explored challenges from the teacher's perspective. In a survey of teachers who had participated in the Computer Science for All professional development. So it was professional development that was designed to lead towards their implementation and prepare them for that. We asked teachers about the barriers they faced. And these are responses from teachers who were not able to implement computer science despite participating in the in-depth professional development offered by CS4All. And again, they faced largely structural barriers. So you'll see that 71% said that they lacked instructional time. That was the biggest barrier they were facing. They couldn't find space in the curriculum to integrate or offer CS instruction. And this was especially true for elementary school teachers, which makes sense because they're more likely to be integrating it into their core subjects. But they found struggle to keep up with the pacing schedules of their core curriculum. They also were struggling with time to prepare. So they needed a lot of time to figure out exactly how to integrate the CS content into their subject area instruction, again, especially for elementary level teachers. Middle school and high school teachers had different kinds of demands. A big barrier was that classes sometimes were not scheduled. And particularly for high school teachers, some teachers would go to training and they'd come back to school the next year and the math teacher had left. So they were reassigned to teach math that year and weren't able to teach computer science. So I'd love to hear from all of you. If any of these challenges resonate with you, please add them into the chat and tell us what challenges your schools have been facing or that you've faced. And if any of these resonate or if there are other challenges. And I also wanted to note, because I know that you were talking yesterday about the CS certification requirements. This is likely to be an upcoming challenge on the horizon that we'll all face, particularly high school teachers. In our survey sample, only 7% of teachers who completed the survey had a New York State certification. Yeah, all of the above, Deborah. So the previous findings helped identify the barriers that teachers and schools were facing. And now I'm going to share a little bit about some of the factors that we've seen that support strong and sustainable implementation. And what we did was look at schools that were higher implementers and compare them to schools that were struggling to implement or lower implementing in terms of the number of students that they are reaching and the extent to which that reach was equitable for Black, Latinx students and girls. And what we found was that the higher implementers were much more likely to engage in the CS4All professional development. So they sent 2 or more teachers to participate in the professional development. development. And they also had school leaders participating in the professional development. So they were, the school leaders were on the same page with teachers in terms of the goals of the initiative and how to work forward with it. And they were also able to develop more of a community of practice to share what they were learning and to support each other as they came back into the classroom and put into practice what they had learned. Second, we found that the stronger implementers also had a number of support structures in place that facilitated their success. So they had CS teams, a team of teachers and leaders that were working together towards a common goal. And to the point of the quote that I shared at the beginning, they weren't working alone. And these teams put into place implementation plans that had a vision for computer science for the school and mission statements and detailed plans for how to broaden participation and how to engage families and increase awareness around the value and the importance of computer science instruction. Third, the stronger schools also had leaders with strong CS vision. So they were able to articulate exactly what the computer science vision was for their school. They also understood the definition of computer science for their school. And we know that there can be some confusion around what counts as computer science. And then I think most importantly, leaders in stronger implementing schools were more likely to say they understood how their CS programming aligned with other initiatives and priorities in the schools. And this is really important given we know that one of the largest barriers reported by teachers was the sense of competing priorities, that they were challenged for understanding and figuring out how to make room for computer science in their classrooms. So being able to align computer science so that it's not an add-on, not something they're trying to squeeze in, but yet works in harmony with the other initiatives and other priorities in the school is extremely important. And then fourth, strong implementers were more likely to intentionally set aside time in the curriculum and in the school schedule to make computer science an instructional priority. And they did this by integrating CS into the core subjects that all students take, or at middle and school and high school levels. They were often requiring computer science courses as part of their core curriculum. And it's important to note that we had a lot of teachers and leaders tell us that making CS a priority is related to systems of accountability. And so the two quotes at the bottom of this slide really illustrate that. So, you know, they said if computational skills isn't on the state exams, or if it is on the state exams, schools will treat CS instruction as a higher priority. And if you want all schools to offer CS and you want all students to take it, you need to make it a graduation requirement. So interestingly, though, in the same survey where we compared stronger and higher implementers to lower implementers, we didn't see a difference in the extent to which they agreed to these statements about norms and values of CS. Now, this might be because those who agreed to take our survey, even if they were struggling with implementation, were already bought into and support the goals of the initiative. That's certainly probably the case in some cases. But the findings also demonstrate that the buy-in and the support and the valuing of CS is not enough for success. So there were still, lower implementers had this buy-in and they still were struggling to make progress towards the initiative. So there are other structural components and dimensions of scale and sustainability that also need to be in place. So up to this point, I've really focused on access and participation and implementation. And now I want to show a little bit about what we've learned about equitable CS and why looking beyond access and participation is important. And I'll foreground this with a little bit of findings from our student measures of attitudes towards computer science and a measure of computational thinking. And this graph shows pretty starkly the relationship between positive attitudes and achievement on computational thinking measures. And we know that attitudes are linked to stronger computational thinking skills and achievement. So if students who have low levels of confidence, they also score much lower on our CT assessment. And at the same time, we see disparities, and this is something Tom pointed out at the beginning too. We see disparities in both attitudes and achievement. So at all levels of school, elementary, middle, and high, Black and Latinx students had less positive attitudes and scored lower on our CT assessments. And at the middle and high school, girls had less positive attitudes and scored lower on CT assessments than boys. And girls in the elementary level also had lower confidence than boys, which really emphasizes the case for the need to focus on more than just access and participation. And knowing that if we don't change students' experiences, we're not going to attract students to computer science and keep them engaged. So what have we learned about computer science, culturally responsive, sustaining education practices? In this survey, we found that most teachers, over 50%, were implementing a variety of culturally responsive practices. And they were most likely to report practices like tapping into students' interests and connecting it to the CS content, and ensuring that there is representation in terms of cultural backgrounds and identities. They were a little bit less likely to report that they were engaging in issues around criticality and social justice for computer science. And it may be that at least initially, it's easier for teachers to focus on connecting to students' interests and representation. It's not to say that teachers haven't been challenged in implementing CRSE. So when we asked them what the barriers were, almost half of them said a barrier was lack of time to implement culturally responsive sustaining education. And almost 30% said they were facing competing priorities. So it's suggesting that some teachers are seeing culturally responsive approaches as an add-on, something that must be done in addition to computer science content that they're teaching, rather than an approach to good instruction overall, which is a little bit of a theme I'll turn back to in a minute. But also note that a fair number of teachers said they need more materials and resources, and they lacked expertise. So more training and professional learning needed to happen. Overall, though, we found that teachers had very positive attitudes towards the importance of CRSE, with most teachers agreeing to statements like lessons should empower and prepare students to solve problems in their lives. And at the same time, there may be some reluctance to address some of the harder issues related to racism, sexism, and other inequalities in computer science. So 70% of teachers agree that those issues should be discussed openly in computer science classrooms, but 24% were neutral about that, and 6% disagreed. And what we learned from our qualitative data collection was that some teachers appear to believe there's a trade-off between providing high-quality computer science instruction and implementing culturally responsive practices. And that tension between high-quality instruction and CRSE is illustrated by the quote at the bottom, with a teacher who said, "I still believe CS instruction should include more CS. Training teachers in CRSE is critical, but it's also critical that we provide quality instruction, CS instruction." Some teachers we spoke to even questioned whether CRSE has a place in the computer science classroom, saying that CS is neutral or colorblind. So to circle back to the themes that are emerging from our evaluation, context matters. Our findings pointed to substantial differences in levels of implementation and different kinds of challenges that were encountered by different grade bands, different types of CS instruction, and that they require different kinds of solutions and support. There's no one size fit all. So elementary schools need more support in figuring out how to best integrate computer science into subject area courses and finding space for computer science in their curriculum. And schools that have yet to offer computer science need more support in figuring out how to align their programming with the vision of their school and the other school initiatives and priorities. And schools that are already offering computer science to all their students need support in ensuring that it's sustainable, and that to make sure that the instruction is high quality, affirming, and empowering, particularly for students who have been marginalized in CS. In terms of constraints, many of the challenges that teachers and leaders reported are structural in nature. And it's important because this is maybe harder to solve and more likely requires administrative support and organizational structures to address. So back to the quote that you can't do this alone, it takes a team. And then finally, addressing access and participation are not enough. They won't help us address these long-standing inequalities. We really need to pay attention to the instruction, the pedagogy, and students' experiences, and do it in a way that CRSE is not seen as an add-on or a trade-off with rigor, which I think is going to require addressing this reluctance to discuss hard topics and confronting misguided notions of CS as colorblind. So just a quick note of where we're going in the future with our research. We're right now exploring what the shorter term and longer term outcomes for CS education are, looking at whether early exposure leads to achievement in other subjects, as well as stronger interest, engagement, and persistence in CS education and career. We're also working on developing and validating measures of culturally responsive practice that's specific to computer science instruction. I strongly believe that if we're going to make progress in this area, we need valid and reliable measures and a strong understanding of what CRSE looks like in practice so that we can measure it, how well it's being done, the extent to which it's being done, and then we can study what kinds of supports are needed to help build teachers and educators' capacity to do it. And then finally, once we have those valid and reliable measures, we're planning to rigorously study the relationship between CRSE and student outcomes, which will provide critical evidence that we need to move the field forward. So finally, I wanted to acknowledge and thank the amazing team of researchers. This research reflects a lot of hard work from many individuals, all shown on this page, as well as the amazing educators, teachers, school leaders, and students, and the New York City Department of Education, CS4All staff, several of who I see are on this webinar. We're just truly grateful for their thought partnership and their generosity and their time, for sharing their insights and experiences with us. So thank you for inviting me to share what we've learned. We're really interested in hearing what you've learned, so would welcome you reaching out to us. And if you're interested in hearing more about or seeing some of our other publications and reports, please scan the QR code to link to our website.
Amazing. Thank you, Cheri. We have a couple minutes just in case folks have questions, and I saw one in the chat from Matt. I didn't hear any discussion about the budgeting and resource allocation at different schools and how that affects implementation. Were private schools more likely to represent the growth that you saw in CS implementation? I don't think private school data is included here, but was there any factoring into account budgeting and resource allocation?
That's a great question, and you're right. Our evaluation is focused only on the public schools, and it has not looked at resource allocation per se, other than to look at who's taken advantage of the resources that CS4All has made available. So the resources are made available to all schools, but some, there's some selection there in terms of schools that are choosing to take up those resources.
Amazing.
But great question.
Excellent. Are there any other questions from the crowd here?
I think I saw earlier a question about how we look at elementary school, how we count elementary school computer science. And we do this through the course record data that the Department of Education collects, and we're counting any units or courses that include at least 11 hours of instruction in computer science.
So Christy asked if you could talk more about those teachers who did infuse CRSE practices in their work. What were they noticing in their classrooms?
Sorry, could you say that again?
The teachers who were infusing CRSE practices in their work, what were they noticing in their classrooms?
So the teachers, we've started to do some observations of that and some in-depth interviews of teachers that are using CRSE practices in their work. And our teachers are reporting a lot more engagement from students because they are really tapping into their personal interests, but also an elevation of students' sense of criticality. So thinking about understanding how computer science can be used as a tool that empowers them to think about, to investigate, to act on issues that they care about, that particularly issues around social justice.
Amazing. Jackie asked, what curriculum are you using? And I posted the link to the blueprint.
Yep.
Kelly asked, can you unpack precisely what you mean when you say colorblind/neutral?
Yeah, that's a great question. And also want to point out, Christy put in the link to her equity impact report, which I think talks more in depth about the multi-level professional learning opportunities that they offer, called equity in computer science. And I think it has some examples of what teachers are seeing as the results of that work in their classrooms. But when we talk about colorblind or neutral, we're talking about teachers who are saying computer science can't be biased. It's neutral. They're not seeing the ways in which computer science and industries can be biased and can be used. For example, algorithms that have implicit bias in them, or other ways that implicit bias seeps into computer science. So it's teachers not seeing the way that computers are not neutral.
Cool. There's one more, and this might be a future research question or interesting question. Robin asked, I've experienced some correlation between administrators' background in math and science and support for a computer science program in a school. Has any data about this topic been studied at CS4All?
Oh, that's a really great question. We haven't looked at administrators' background and the relationship between whether or not they're having success in implementation or even just have a different approach to their work. But we do have examples of principals who don't have a background in computer science, math, or science at all. In fact, we have an interesting school that's got a theater arts theme, and this principal's been a champion in terms of CS4All and used really creative ways to embed CS into their core curriculum around theater and theater arts.
Yeah, and I put the link to CS4All's School Leaders program into the chat as well. So CS4All does dedicated training for school leaders whose teachers are undergoing professional development and implementing computer science. And that has also, I'm sure, besides their background academically, been a factor in implementation.
Yeah, as I said, we've seen a strong relationship between leaders who have gone through the CS4All leader program and stronger implementation, more success, greater progress towards the goals.
Amazing. Jackie asked, is this training only for New York City teachers? This particular training is, but throughout the state, there are Smart Start grants for K-8 teachers. There are 17 of them across the state. There are also nonprofits doing training. So stay tuned. That's a great segue into thanking Cheri, and and I'll talk about some of the folks you might meet today in your breakout session. So thank you so much, Cheri. We really appreciate you sharing all of your wisdom that you've collected over these years. It's incredible to see the data really put together. Thank you so much for joining us.